Nobody warns you that grief can become a doorbell. It keeps ringing after the person is gone. And the worst part is not who comes to the door. The worst part is who does not. Helen died on a Thursday morning in Greensboro, North Carolina. Acute leukemia. 48 days from the first blood test to the funeral home, calling me sir in that soft voice people use when your life has already burned down. She was 54. She still had a little red notebook labeled Route 66, with pages for Chicago, St. Louis, Tulsa, Santa Fe, and all the diners where she wanted to order pie just because the sign looked old. We never took that trip. I am telling you this so you understand the shape of the emptiness. It was not a quiet house. It was not a bed too big for one man or a closet full of dresses I could not touch. It was the feeling that the person who translated the whole world for me had stepped out of the room, and suddenly everybody else started speaking in a language I did not know. Helen and I were married 29 years. She burned toast, laughed at weather reports, overwatered every plant except the one she was trying to save, and somehow made an ordinary Tuesday feel like a place worth living in. What I did not expect, what no grief book from the church library and no casserole with masking tape on the lid prepared me for, was what my family did after the funeral. They did not attack me. They did not steal from me. They did not say anything cruel at first. They simply allowed me to become optional. Slowly, politely, efficiently optional. Welcome back to Dad's Silent Justice. Before this story gets colder, comment where you are listening from and what time it is there. And subscribe to the channel. It costs you almost nothing, but it helps us keep bringing you stories about people who thought neglect did not leave fingerprints. Let me introduce the people who left those fingerprints. My older brother Frank was 65, retired from the post office, lived in Winston-Salem, about half an hour away if Interstate 40 was not acting like a parking lot. He had a voice like a courtroom door and opinions about everybody else's lawn. My younger sister Paula was 57, lived in Raleigh, busy in the way people become when they want busyness to be a personality. My daughter Sarah was 30, married to Matt, with 2 little girls, living in High Point, 25 minutes from my house. My son Owen was 27, single, living in Greensboro, 9 minutes away. I checked it once. 9 minutes. 12. If you hit every red light. That was the family. 4 people close enough to come over for coffee without needing a suitcase. 2 of them, my own children. Helen died, and they came to the funeral. People are very good at funerals. They know where to stand, what to wear, how to tilt their heads. Frank squeezed my shoulder and said, "Ray, you need anything, you call me." Paula cried into a napkin and told everyone Helen had been the sister she never had, which was news to Helen and would have made her raise one eyebrow. Sarah held my hand so hard my knuckles hurt. Owen stood by the casket with his jaw locked like he was holding up a roof. For the first month, I believed we were going to survive as a family. I believed that because I wanted to, and wanting is a dangerous thing when you are lonely. I started cooking because the house demanded something that smelled alive. Helen had been the cook. I had been the man who chopped onions badly and asked if she needed help only after the help was no longer needed. After she died, I learned how to make chicken and dumplings from the index card in her recipe box. I learned meatloaf, pot roast, green beans with bacon, peach cobbler, biscuits that were not embarrassing by the 3rd try. The first Sunday dinner after the funeral, I called everyone. I said, "I made too much food. Come over if you can." They came. Frank brought sweet tea from Bojangles as if that counted as emotional labor. Paula drove in from Raleigh and complained about traffic until the grandkids distracted her. Sarah and Matt came with the girls, and the house had little socks on the floor again. Owen showed up late, smelled like car wash soap, and ate so many dumplings that I almost cried, because for 1 hour the kitchen sounded like Helen had only stepped into the laundry room. I stood at the stove with steam on my glasses and thought, all right, we are cracked, but not broken. I thought the family would gather around the hole Helen left and keep each other from falling in. That was my first mistake. The second mistake was continuing to set the table long after the chairs began staying empty. For a while, the Sundays looked real. Frank came 4 times. Then twice more if you count the afternoon he watched most of a basketball game and left before dessert. Paula came 3 times in the first 2 months, which for Paula was basically a parade. Sarah came when the girls did not have soccer or colds or birthday parties for children whose names she said like I should know them. Owen came when he was hungry or needed to use my pressure washer. I did not mind. I told myself hunger was still a reason to come home. Then the fade started. That is the part people do not understand about abandonment. It does not always slam the door. Sometimes it just stops knocking. Frank had church committee things. Then a bad back. Then a neighbor's deck project. Paula's visits became calls. Then texts. Then little thumbs-up reactions to photos Sarah posted of the girls. Sarah was buried under work and school pickups and a life that apparently had no spare corner for a father 25 minutes away. Owen was the one that cut the deepest, because 9 minutes is not distance. 9 minutes is a song and half a red light. In October, 4 months after Helen died, I made beef stew because the weather had finally turned and Helen always said the first cold night deserved a pot of something heavy. I called Owen. He did not answer. I left a message that I tried to make sound casual. Hey buddy, made stew. I got enough for 6 people because apparently your mother is still running the serving sizes around here. Come by if you want. He texted 3 hours later. Can't tonight. Rain check. I stared at those 2 words until they stopped looking like English. Rain check. The most American way to say no without having to feel the shape of it. The rain check never happened. That first year, I counted the calls. I am not proud of that. I know it makes me sound small, but grief already makes you small in 100 private ways. And counting became proof that I was not imagining things. Between Frank, Paula, Sarah, and Owen, I received 13 calls in 12 months. Frank called 4 times. One of them because he wanted Helen's recipe for pecan bars. Paula called twice and once forgot why she had dialed me. Sarah called 5 times. 2 of those on speaker with the girls screaming in the back seat, and 1 because Matt needed to borrow my ladder. Owen called twice. 1 call lasted 41 seconds. I know because I looked. I want to be clear about the timeline. This was not 15 years later. This was not a widower who had become difficult at Thanksgiving. This was the first year after my wife of 29 years died. The sympathy cards were still stacked in a shoebox in the den. Her reading glasses were still on the nightstand because I could not move them without feeling like I was stealing her from the room. I still bought her yogurt at Harris Teeter twice before I realized what I had done. And my family was already treating me like a holiday decoration nobody wanted to throw away but nobody intended to plug in. Year 2. I tried harder. That is the humiliating sentence of my life. I tried harder to be loved by people who had known my address for decades. I called. I invited. I drove to High Point on a Saturday with a casserole and a board game for the girls. I sat outside Sarah's house for 9 minutes. Which is funny because 9 minutes was also how far Owen lived from me. I sat there with the engine running because I had become embarrassed to surprise my own daughter. When I finally knocked, Sarah opened the door with that startled look people have when the past arrives without texting first. Dad, she said, what are you doing here? I held up the casserole like a fool presenting evidence. I was in the neighborhood. I was not in the neighborhood. I had driven 25 minutes with chicken and rice sweating under foil. She looked back over her shoulder. We were just about to head out. They were not heading out. Matt was on the couch in shorts, watching a golf tournament with 1 foot on the coffee table. One of the girls was coloring in pajamas at 2 in the afternoon. But I said, of course. No problem. I left the casserole anyway. She texted later, thanks, Dad. The girls loved it. No invitation followed. Year 3. The freezer became my witness. I cooked because stopping felt like admitting Helen was not coming back, and nobody else was coming either. I made trays of lasagna, chili in containers, pulled pork, cornbread, soap. I labeled everything with dates like I was running a restaurant for ghosts. Every time I opened the freezer, there they were. Little plastic boxes of evidence. Hope with lids. Hope with freezer burn. Hope stacked behind a bag of peas. I started seeing a therapist named Dr. Bennett. She had silver hair, sharp glasses, and the patience of someone who had heard every version of human disappointment and still believed in breathing exercises. She told me to communicate directly. People cannot meet needs you do not name, she said. So I named them. I sat with Frank at a diner off Wendover Avenue. And I said, I am not doing well. I miss Helen. And I miss all of you. I feel like the family disappeared when she did. Frank stirred his coffee so long the spoon became the whole conversation. Then he said, Ray, nobody disappeared. Folks are just busy. You know how life is. I did know how life was. Life was a wife dying in less than 7 weeks. Life was standing in a grocery aisle holding 2 cartons of blueberry yogurt like an idiot. Life was a Sunday table with 4 clean plates and 1 dirty one, but I nodded because I was still interested in being easy to love. I told Paula next. She was in her car. Because Paula was always in her car. Always between one important place and another. I said, I need to tell you something before I lose the nerve. I am lonely. Paula. I feel like I have been doing all the reaching. There was a pause, then the soft exhale of a person preparing to be reasonable while being cruel. Ray, she said, grief has made you clingy. You cannot expect everyone to orbit your sadness forever. I remember looking at the kitchen wall and feeling my face go hot. Not from anger exactly. From recognition. She had said out loud what everyone else had been living. Grief has made you clingy. I wrote that down after we hung up, not because I wanted to punish her with it. I wrote it down because some sentences are keys. They unlock a door inside you. And after that, you cannot pretend you do not know what room you are standing in. Year 5 arrived. Then 6. Holidays became logistics. Sarah invited me for Thanksgiving twice, but both times I felt like an extra chair wedged near the hallway. Frank hosted Christmas one year and forgot to tell me dinner had moved from 6 to 3. So I arrived with a pie after everyone had eaten. Paula hugged me and said, There he is. Like I had been the one missing. Owen came by now and then when his truck made a noise or when he needed tools. I loaned tools. I fixed things. I accepted crumbs and called them bread because fathers are trained to do that. Year 7 is when Owen asked for money, $31,800. He had gotten tangled in a mobile detailing business with a friend who was much better at confidence than math. The van lease was behind. Equipment was on a card with interest that looked like a crime. He called me at 9:30 on a Tuesday night, which already told me the call was not about how I was doing. Dad, he said, I know I have not been around like I should. I need help. I am in real trouble. He needed the money in 10 days. Here is what that tells you about the man I was. I gave it to him. Not half. Not a lecture with a check attached. I gave him $31,800 from money Helen and I had saved for that Route 66 trip. Because he was my son, and because I heard fear in his voice, and because a foolish part of me thought maybe rescue could become a bridge. Maybe after this, he would remember that I was not just an emergency contact with a bank account. Maybe he would come for dinner and stay after the plates were cleared. For 18 months. Owen was wonderful. That is the bitterest part. He called every Sunday. He came over twice a month. He helped me clean the gutters without being asked. He asked about his mother. Sometimes, he paid me back in installments. Every dollar. And I will not take that from him. He was not a thief. He was something more confusing. He was present when presence had a ledger. The month the debt was cleared, the calls slowed. 2 months later, they stopped. I marked the last payment in my notebook. Then, without meaning to bother, I marked the silence that followed. My 68th birthday fell on a Sunday. I made dinner. I know how pathetic that sounds. But I was a man built out of habits by then. I set the table for 6 because setting fewer felt like giving up, and I had spent almost a decade confusing giving up with dying. I made Helen's meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans, and the chocolate cake she used to make in a square pan because round cakes, she said, were too pleased with themselves. Frank texted at 8 in the morning. Big day. Little brother. Paula sent a bouquet with a card the florist had clearly written. Sarah left a voicemail while driving. Owen sent a gift card to a steakhouse I did not like. Nobody came. I sat at a table with 6 place settings and 1 candle in the middle because Helen had loved candles even when there was no occasion. I said, "Helen, what am I supposed to do?" The house made house noises. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a neighbor's dog barked at nothing. Helen did not answer. She had been gone 9 years by then, and the dead are not as talkative as the grieving want them to be. So I ate 1 slice of meatloaf, wrapped the rest, washed 6 clean plates and 1 dirty one, and finally admitted the truth. The family I kept setting the table for had died with her. I had simply refused to attend that funeral. I made the decision slowly, which is how you know it was real. Dramatic people decide in lightning. Tired people decide like weather. Pressure builds. Clouds gather. Then one morning you wake up and the storm has already chosen its direction. I called a real estate agent in Burlington, not Greensboro, because I did not want anyone at church or the grocery store hearing about it before I had done what I intended to do. Her name was Marcy. She walked through the house with a tablet and polite shoes, complimented the hardwood floors, and valued the place at $388,000. This was the house where Helen had painted the downstairs bathroom yellow against my better judgment and been absolutely right. It was the house where Sarah learned to ride a bike in the driveway, where Owen broke the garage window with a baseball and blamed wind with a straight face, where Helen and I danced in the kitchen during a hurricane because the power was out, and she said fear deserved music. It was also the house where I had hosted almost 9 years of unanswered dinners. I told Marcy to list it. She asked if I wanted a few days. I said, "I have had a few years." It sold in 26 days to a nurse and a teacher with 1 child and another due in August. They loved the kitchen. I did not tell them the kitchen was haunted by dumplings and freezer containers and a woman humming old Motown songs while stirring gravy. I signed what needed signing. I found a small apartment in Southport, North Carolina, 4 blocks from the water, almost 4 hours from Greensboro if you stopped for coffee and did not get trapped behind beach traffic near Wilmington. Southport was far enough to make casual guilt inconvenient and close enough that nobody could claim I had left the country. I changed my phone number. I canceled the landline. I closed the Facebook account Helen had made for us because she liked seeing pictures of other people's babies and pretending not to judge their curtains. I moved my bank accounts to a credit union with no branch near my old neighborhood. Nothing illegal. Nothing hidden in the way criminals hide things. I just became hard to find for people who had spent years proving they would not look very hard. I packed Helen's photographs. Her Red Route 66 notebook. Her yellow mixing bowl. 2 boxes of books. My clothes. The cast iron pan. And the quilt her mother made when Sarah was born. I left the dining table. That surprised me. I thought I would keep it because the table had been the center of our life. But by then it felt less like furniture and more like a witness. I did not want cross-examining me every morning. I left the 6 chairs. 2. On the last day, I walked room to room. I stood in the yellow bathroom and laughed once, because Helen was still right about the color. I stood in the kitchen longer than was healthy. Then I locked the door, put the keys in an envelope, and drove toward the coast without leaving a note. The first night in Southport, I slept 10 hours. I am not exaggerating. 10 hours without waking at 3 in the morning to listen for a house that was not going to become full again. My apartment had old floors, a narrow balcony, and a view of a street where golf carts seemed to have more rights than cars. In the morning, I walked to the waterfront. The Cape Fear River was gray-blue and wide. The kind of water that does not care about your family drama. Pelicans moved like old men with secrets. A fairy horn sounded somewhere, low and steady. For the first time in years, I did not feel like the day had already disappointed me. I built a new life in tiny, stubborn pieces. Coffee, at a place with 3 tables, and a woman behind the counter who called every man honey with equal sincerity. Walks along the waterfront. Then farther, past houses, with porches and flags and dogs that considered barking a civic duty. A used bookstore run by a retired history teacher named Calvin, who believed every problem in America could be understood through either baseball or the Civil War, and was wrong often enough to be entertaining. I bought fish from a market that smelled like the ocean had opinions. I cooked for one, At first that felt sad. Then it felt honest. Cooking for one is different. You make exactly enough. You do not leave a pot on the stove as bait. You do not keep biscuits warm for people who are still deciding whether your loneliness fits into their calendar. You eat when the food is ready. You wash one plate because one plate was used. There is a dignity in accuracy. I had spent years lying to myself with serving sizes. Southport taught me the mercy of making enough. And no more. It took them 6 weeks to notice the phone number was dead. I know because the new owners later told Sarah when she showed up at the old house looking confused enough to qualify as weather damage. She knocked on the door, and a nurse with a toddler on her hip answered. Sarah said, "I am sorry. My father lives here." The nurse said, "Not anymore. We bought it last month." I wish I could say I feel guilty about that moment. I do not. A stranger had to tell my daughter I had moved because my daughter had not asked me anything that would have let me tell her myself. The panic spread the way. Panic always spreads, unevenly, and with blame attached. Sarah called Owen. Owen called Frank. Frank called Paula. Paula called Sarah and said, "What do you mean?" Sold the house as if Sarah had misplaced me in a drawer. They tried the landline. Dead. They tried my old cell. Dead. They called a neighbor I barely knew. They checked hospitals, which I found touching in the same way a smoke alarm is touching after the building has already burned to the ground. Owen tried to file a missing person report. The officer told him, "Sir, your father is an adult who sold his home, changed his number, and moved. That is not missing. That is leaving." Frank hired a man who called himself an investigator, but, from what I learned later, mostly found boats, runaway teenagers, and husbands who were less mysterious than they believed. It took him almost 5 months to find me. I was not in witness protection. I had my name on the lease, a library card, a pharmacy account, and a habit of arguing with Calvin loudly enough that half of Southport knew I preferred John Steinbeck to Ernest Hemingway. I had not disappeared. I had simply stopped reporting my location to people who used my availability like a public utility. Sarah found me first. It was late spring, nearly 7 months after I had left. I came back from the fish market with flounder and lemons. And there she was on the stairs outside my building, holding her phone in both hands, like it might keep her upright. She looked older. Or maybe I had stopped seeing her every time I looked at old photographs and finally saw the woman in front of me. "Dad," she said. "Sarah," I said. We were scared. I set the grocery bag down. "Were you?" she flinched. And I knew I had said the wrong thing and the true thing at the same time. "How could you do this?" she asked. "We did not know if you were dead." I thought about the birthday voicemail recorded from her minivan. I thought about the casserole on her porch. I thought about 13 calls in a year and the freezer full of proof. I said, "Sarah, when is my birthday?" She blinked. "What, my birthday? What date, Dad?" "That is not fair. It is not a trick question." She looked away toward the street. "October 2nd, October 4th. I said, "Same date, since 1958. The little joke died between us. She covered her mouth, and I let the silence do its work. Then I asked, "How many times did you call me last year before I moved?" She started crying before she answered, which was an answer of its own. "I do not know," she said. 5. I said, 2 were while you were driving and 1 was about Matt borrowing the ladder." "Dad, I am sorry." I nodded. "I believe you. But you are sorry because I am gone. You were not sorry when I was 25 minutes away and cooking enough food for a rescue shelter every Sunday." She sat on the step, and I sat beside her because I am still her father. Even if I was trying to learn a new shape for that word, I told her about the dinners. I told her about the freezer. I told her about sitting in her driveway with chicken and rice. Ashamed to knock on my own daughter's door. Her face collapsed in a way that made me want to put my arm around her. I did not. Some pain deserves to arrive without a blanket. "You all moved forward after your mother died." I said, "I am not angry that life continued. Life has to continue. Children need rides. Bills need paying. Houses need cleaning. I understand that. What I do not understand is how I became something everyone assumed would wait. I was there. I was always there. That was the problem. She whispered, "Can you come home?" I looked up at the balcony, at my little apartment with one chair by the window and Helen's photograph on the shelf. Home to what? Sarah, she did not answer. Nobody ever had an answer for the most important questions. She drove back before dark. I cooked the flounder for one. Frank came 2 weeks later. I saw his truck from my balcony. The same silver truck he washed more than he drove. He sat in it for a long time, probably preparing a speech that sounded firm but loving in his head. When he knocked, I let him in. I made coffee because I was raised correctly, and because withholding coffee would have made the story too simple. He sat at my small kitchen table and looked around like he expected to find disaster. Instead, he found a clean apartment, a bowl of lemons, Helen's Route 66, notebook on a shelf, and a man who had slept well. "You look good," he said, suspiciously. "I am good," I said. "Ray, you scared the hell out of us." "I know. That was not the plan. But I understand the result." He frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means I did not leave to scare you. I left because staying was killing something in me I still needed." Frank rubbed his forehead. "We are your family." I smiled a little because that sentence always arrived dressed as a fact when it was actually an unpaid bill. "How many Sundays did I invite you over after Helen died?" I asked. He looked annoyed. "Ray, do not do this." "I am doing it." "How many I do not know." "A lot. A lot," I said. "And how many did you come to after the first few months?" He stared into his coffee. "I helped. I was around. You were around like a streetlight is around." Frank, technically present in the neighborhood, not exactly keeping anyone warm. His jaw tightened. "That is low." "No," I said. "Low was arriving at Christmas after dinner because you forgot to tell me the time changed." Then letting Paula say, "There he is," like I had been the one missing. He looked wounded. Frank did not like being made to feel cruel because Frank believed cruelty required intention. That is where people are wrong. Some of the cruelest things in the world are done by people who simply do not want to be inconvenienced by another person's need. He said, "I am sorry." "I know you are." I said, "Are you going to forgive me?" I looked at my older brother. The man who taught me to throw a baseball and once drove through an ice storm to pick me up from a broken-down Chevy when we were 22. I loved him. That was never the question. "No," I said. "Not the way you mean." He sat back like I had slapped him. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means I can love you and still not hand you the old version of me. Forgiveness is not a time machine. You do not get 9 years of Sundays back because you finally found the address." He breathed hard through his nose. "So, we are done." I did not end the family. "Frank, I stopped catering the funeral after everyone else had left." He stood up then, angry because anger was easier than shame. "At the door," he said. "Helen would hate this." That was the first time I almost lost my temper. I said, "Helen would hate that it took me leaving for you to remember I was alive." He had no answer. He left his coffee half full. Paula called instead of visiting, which was the most Paula thing possible. Her first words were, "Ray, I think you have handled this very selfishly." I laughed. I laughed so hard I had to sit down. She waited, offended. While I finished, "Paula," I said, "I have missed that about you." "Missed what?" "Your ability to walk into a burning house and criticize the curtains. This is serious." "Yes, it is. You vanished for almost a decade, and then expected us to chase you." "No," I said. "I expected you to notice before chasing was necessary." She made a frustrated sound. "We had lives. Ray, you could not expect everyone to orbit your sadness forever." There it was, polished by years. Still sharp. I said, "Do you remember what you told me in year 3? Silence. "You told me grief had made me clingy." Another silence. Longer. "I was overwhelmed." She said, "I am sure you were. So I took your advice. I stopped clinging. Apparently I am much better at it than you expected. That is not fair." "No, Paula. It was not fair when I was sitting in a kitchen alone trying to explain loneliness to my sister, and she treated it like a character flaw." I heard her breathing on the line. For a moment, I thought she might actually say something clean and honest. Instead, she said, "So you are punishing us?" I said, "No. Punishment would require me to stay interested in teaching you a lesson. I am not teaching anymore." Class dismissed. Then I hung up. Owen was last. I knew he was coming because Sarah warned me, and because Owen had never understood the difference between apology and dramatic entrance. He drove down on a humid Sunday in June and knocked at my door holding a cardboard box. He looked terrible. Beard grown in patches, eyes red, shirt wrinkled. In the box were my old socket set, a drill, and the pressure washer nozzle he had borrowed 3 years earlier and apparently treated like a sacred relic once guilt became fashionable. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside. He put the box on the floor and stood there staring at Helen's photograph. It was the one from Myrtle Beach. Wind in her hair. Laughing because a gull had stolen half a funnel cake from my hand. Owen's face changed. I had seen that look in the mirror, recognition arriving too late to be useful. "Dad," he said, "I know I do not deserve anything from you." "Correct," I said, not cruelly, just accurately. He swallowed. "I know sorry is not enough." "Also correct." Then he broke. Not politely. Not with one tear. He broke like a grown man whose childhood had finally caught up with him and kicked the door open. He said after Mom died, he could not stand being in the house because every room accused him of surviving her. He said my voice sounded like grief. He said every Sunday invitation felt like walking back into the hospital room, so he avoided one dinner. Then another. Then months went by, and every call he did not make made the next call harder. I listened. He said the money made him feel useful again. Like there was a reason to come over that was not just sadness. Then when he paid it back, he did not know how to show up without a purpose. So he stopped. Again. It was the most honest thing any of them had said to me. I wish honesty had arrived sooner, before it became an obituary for trust. I told him to sit down. I made coffee. Fathers do strange things. Your child can injure you in ways nobody else could reach. And still, some old reflex in your body wants to put a warm mug in his hands. We sat across from each other at my little table, the box of tools between us like an exhibit. "I believe you," I said. He looked up quickly. Too hopeful. "I believe that looking at me hurt. I believe the house hurt. I believe you were young and scared and grief made you run. I believe you told yourself you would call tomorrow until tomorrow became years. I believe all of it." His shoulders lowered like he had been allowed to breathe. Then I said, "It does not change what happened." The breath left him. "Dad, Owen, I gave you $31,800. I gave you money your mother and I had saved for a trip she never got to take. And for 18 months, you remembered I existed. The calls, the dinners, the gutters, all of it. Then the last payment cleared. And you disappeared so fast I could have set my watch by it. You think I did not see that?" He stared down at the box. I was ashamed. I know. Shame is very busy. It keeps people from doing the one thing that would actually help. He cried quietly then, which was harder to watch than the breaking. He asked if there was any way back. I looked at my son, my boy, the baby Helen once held in the hospital, and whispered, "This one is going to be trouble." With a smile so proud it could light a city. I wanted to say yes. Every father has a weak room inside him where yes is already waiting. But I had spent 9 years living in that room, and it had nearly ruined me. "There is a way forward," I said, "but forward does not look like the old house. It does not look like Sunday dinners with 6 plates. It does not look like me waiting by the phone, grateful for whatever scraps fall off your schedule. Forward looks like a call once a month, if you can be consistent. It looks like dinner somewhere neutral twice a year. It looks like adult effort from both sides. And if you stop making it, I will not chase you. That version of me is gone." "That sounds cold," he said. "Yes," I said. "Sometimes cold is what happens when warmth is left outside too long." He nodded like the sentence hurt, which was fair. Before he left, he asked if he could hug me. I let him. I am not made of stone, but I did not melt either. That is the part nobody tells you. You can love someone, hold them while they cry, and still not give them the keys to your peace. After Owen left, I opened Helen's Red Route 66 notebook. I had not opened it since Greensboro. Her handwriting was everywhere, slanted and impatient. Little stars beside diners. Notes about motels shaped like teepees. A page that said Santa Monica at sunset. Wear the blue dress. I sat there a long time. Then I did something that felt both foolish and holy. I booked a flight to Chicago and reserved a rental car, not a practical car. A convertible. Because Helen would have called that ridiculous, and then worn sunglasses the entire way. I drove the old route west in pieces. Chicago to St. Frum's. Louis. St. Louis to Tulsa. Tulsa to Amarillo. Then New Mexico, where the sky looks too big to belong to anyone. I ate pie in diners Helen had circled. I took pictures of neon signs. I bought postcards and addressed them to nobody. In Santa Fe. I sat outside a small restaurant with a glass of wine at 3 in the afternoon and cried so quietly the waiter pretended not to see, which I appreciated more than comfort. At the Santa Monica Pier, I opened the notebook to the last page and watched the sun go down. I said, "We made it. Helen, late. But we made it. People want to know if I am happy now. As if happiness is the verdict. I do not know. Happy is a young word. It runs around too much. I am peaceful. I sleep. I cook exactly enough food. I walk by the water in the mornings. And sometimes Calvin from the bookstore joins me and explains baseball statistics I did not request. Sarah calls on the first Sunday of the month. She has missed twice. And I did not call to remind her. Frank sends a card at Christmas. Paula sent an apology letter that used the word clingy exactly once, which I respected. Owen came to dinner in Wilmington last fall. Neutral ground. 2 grown men. 1 shared history. No magic repair. That is enough for now. Enough is a word I had to learn late. For years, I treated love like a table that had to be set for people who might come hungry someday. Now I know love is not the same as waiting. Love is not leaving the porch light on until the bulb burns out and calling the darkness family. Love can be a boundary. Love can be a quiet phone. Love can be 1 plate in the sink and no shame in that. If Helen can see me, and I have decided she can because the alternative makes the room too empty, I hope she understands. She was kinder than I am. She would have told me to keep calling. Maybe. Or maybe that is just the version of her I used to keep myself trapped. The real Helen. The woman who once threw a dead houseplant into the trash and said, "Not everything wants saving." I might have understood sooner than I did. I think about that a lot. My name is Raymond Mercer. I live in Southport, North Carolina. I walk by the water most mornings. I do not cook extra unless I invite someone who has already said yes. I do not keep a freezer full of hope. I do not set 6 places for 1 man. And I do not wait for people to remember my worth after I have already remembered it myself. If this story stayed with you, comment where you are listening from and whether you have ever had to stop waiting for someone who kept taking your love for granted. And subscribe to Dad's Silent Justice for more stories about family, silence, and the cold moment when someone finally chooses peace.